Hello and welcome to this Let's Talk Wellbeing session this month, looking at the second biological law of dis-ease and well-being. And apologies if you can hear my dog barking in the background. Somebody's obviously driving past or something out there on the lane. So just getting myself set up here. Ooh, sorry, bear with me a second. There, that's the one I want. So hoping that you can hear me and see me. And if you can, if you're watching live, it would be lovely if you would just pop your name or hi or hello or something in the chat so that I can know I am streaming. I'm finding this an interesting new setup because I use StreamYard and it connects differently to Facebook now from how it used to. And I'm always left thinking, is it actually working? So I hope it is. I hope that you are seeing this live. It is telling me that it's live. So I'm going to dive right in. As I said, today I'm going to be looking at the second biological law of dis-ease and well-being, following on from last month's session. So if you haven't seen that, in that one I covered the first biological law of dis-ease and well-being. And so the second law actually states for every dis-ease, it's going to go through two distinct phases in order to ensure that it reaches a full resolution. I'm going to break that down a little bit. On the next slide, I'll show you what those two phases are and how they play out. But just to explain that what this means is for a dis-ease to reach its full conclusion, for us to go through that and to reach get back to well-being, the dis-ease needs to go through those two full phases in their entirety. So it needs to go through the full part of the first phase and then the full part of the second phase. And hopefully that will become clearer as to why as we go through this session this afternoon. And below the law there, it says, until then, if the Uden shock is reactivated, I'll explain that in a second, the process of going through these phases is still going to be ongoing. Now, a Uden, that stands for something that is unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and we feel we have no coping strategy. UDIN, unexpected, dramatic, isolating, no coping strategy. And in one of my previous Let's Talk Wellbeing sessions, I looked at UDINs in much more depth. So if you didn't see that one and you'd like to learn more about what a UDIN is and how that impacts us and its whole relationship to this dis-ease process, then go over to my YouTube channel, which is Wild TV, and you will find there that there is a video specifically looking at UDINs, and I will stick the link in below this live when I'm finished here. So the UDIN basically is the moment of, it's called sometimes a conflict shock or trauma, because basically that's what it is. And that's not necessarily the big T trauma that we often think of when we hear that word. So the car crash, loss of a limb, being given a terminal diagnosis, 9/11, the tsunami disaster. Those are obviously traumatic, but traumas can also be the smaller, cumulative, maybe covert things that we experience. And it may have been something that we experienced so long ago when we were small that we don't consciously remember it now, but it's held in our body. As Bessel van der Kolk says in his book, the body keeps the score. If we've experienced trauma in the past, which hasn't gone through this dis-ease process, then it's still held within us. But as I've shared before, there is a wonderful quote from A.H. Almaas, who says that our pain and the conflicts we experience are ours. So our body isn't holding on to this for some masochistic reason. It holds the energy of that yudin because it knows there's wisdom in it. When we can fully unpack it, when we can fully go through these two phases of dis-ease and get back to well-being, we are basically unpacking that yudin, the energy, the wisdom that it holds for us, embedding that and using it to help us step more fully into who we were born to be. It's one of those things that we sometimes call a gift that you would never ask for and you wouldn't wish for, but it gives us so much. It gives us that wisdom. It gives us that greater self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the basis for living the life that we long for, that we know we're here for. So dis-ease is not something to fear. Dis-ease, it's not necessarily something we go looking for either. I accept that. But when it comes, because life throws us curveballs and we're not necessarily, or certainly I have learned, and I am no longer looking to avoid dis-ease. Yes, I want to stay as healthy as possible, as much as possible. But if dis-ease comes, I now look at it very differently from how I used to. I look at it as an opportunity, as a gift, as potential wisdom and learning for me when I can take that space and time, which is why it's so important to engage in self-care, give ourselves permission to take the space and time we need in order to do that unpacking, that exploration, decoding, interpretation, however you want to look at it. But coming to the point of understanding what is going on. Why is my body doing what it's doing? Because our body is not making mistakes, going wrong, attacking itself. It's making an adaptation. And I'll be looking at that in more depth as we go along. But what it's basically saying in that second statement there is that if we're not taking the time, or if we haven't yet got to the bottom of what are my symptoms, what wisdom do they hold for me, and being able to process and release that, which is what the body is ultimately trying to do, though sometimes some things can get in the way and hold us stuck. But the ultimate aim is to process, unpack, understand, work through, and then release the energy of that yudin, of that trauma. If parts of, or maybe even all of that, are still held within our body, the potential is that it will be reactivated, which can lead to chronic conditions because the body still is attempting to deal with whatever it's holding in that yudin energy, wherever it may be holding it in the body. And that will be specific. The body doesn't do these things randomly. It has a purpose. It's always just doing what it's designed to do. It's designed to survive. It's designed to thrive. But as I said, some things maybe get in the way of that, maybe beliefs that we're holding that are keeping us limited, keeping us stuck. And those beliefs often come from trauma. But there are ways, and working with a practitioner, particularly if you want to get to the bottom and the nub and the root of any symptoms that you're experiencing, a practitioner of meta consciousness is somebody who can really help you to unpack that to its core level and give you that understanding of why is my body doing what it's doing? What are these specific symptoms? Because in meta consciousness, we ask, why am I sick? Why this part of my body? Why now? And also potentially, why does it keep coming back? But then from the answers to the first four, how do I support myself back to well-being? How do I support myself to heal? And healing basically means coming back to wholeness. So the answers to those first four questions can be found through meta consciousness and support us then to go through that healing, to come back to wholeness and well-being. And if we were to look at that process in a very simplified form, it can look like this. On the left-hand side where it says number 1, that's health. So you've got that line that's just going up and down in a very shallow wave. That is well-being. And you can think of, as it goes up above, there's a line that goes through from left to right. As it goes up above that line, that's like daytime. It's energy. It's when we get that boost in the morning, wakes us up, gets us out of bed, gets us motivated, gets us active through our day. And then that starts to curve downwards as our energy dips and we prepare for sleep at nighttime. That's when the curve is under the line. So this is a basic, regular day to night rhythm on the left, on one there when we are healthy and well and all is good in our world. Number 2 is the Yudin moment. So that's when we receive that trauma, that challenge, that threat perhaps that we are feeling, which is very subjective. It very much depends on who you are, where you are, how resilient or vulnerable you're feeling in that moment. Do you feel that event as being unexpected, dramatic, isolating, and you don't feel you have a coping strategy for it? If you can tick all 4 of those boxes, that is a Yudin. If it's not all 4 of the boxes, it's not a Yudin. But when you can tick all 4 of those, that's one of those things that hits you and you are then holding it in the body, because if you're ticking N, no coping strategy, your body doesn't know what else to do with it. It doesn't know in that moment how to process it. So it stores it, but it will store it in a very specific way. It'll look at, well, what does this require of me? Is it something, we're very metaphorical beings as humans. We see information often in the same way as we see food. You can hear it in our language. I bit off more than I could chew. I couldn't swallow it. It left a bad taste in my mouth. I couldn't digest it. I couldn't assimilate that information, which is what we do with food. So if we see the energy of that Yudin as something I can't digest, it might go to our stomach or to our gut. If it's something that relates, we perceive it as being related to our sense of strength, ability, our being able to do something, to take action about something, then it'll go to our muscular skeletal system or our connective tissues, because that's the part of us that is our active part. Our skeleton gives us support, helps us to stand upright, helps us to move, and our muscles give us strength and capacity. So when we experience a Yudin that relates to those same sort of concepts in a metaphorical way, it'll still be stored in those tissues. It'll be those tissues that are trying to process it, respond to it. So if you have maybe a pain in your back, perhaps a chronic pain in your back, there'll be something where it'll be spinal or muscle related, where you're feeling something along the lines, potentially depending on how you subjectively have felt about, perceived that Yudin moment, that Yudin energy. It may be something like, oh, I just couldn't stand up for myself. I felt like I had no backbone in that situation. That sort of thing. Or with shoulder pain, it might be to do with trying to dodge something, or putting your shoulder against something, or feeling burdened. We say carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, which can also lead to us getting a stooped back. And it then can have a knock-on effect on our posture and aches and pains in our body. So the body is always doing things for a purpose. And when we go through a Yudin at 2, it pushes us into stress. We feel like we don't have a coping strategy in that moment. This thing has blindsided us because it was unexpected. It feels dramatic if it's a Yudin. It can feel huge. It feels isolating, which doesn't necessarily mean that we are actually physically alone. It may mean that it felt shameful and I didn't feel I could talk to anybody about it, or that I don't think anybody would understand. So I feel very isolated in my experience of whatever has happened. And we go into maybe freeze, maybe fight or flight, but we go into some form of stress. And as we go through that period 3 in the diagram, where it says stress phase, our body is making the changes that it feels it needs to make in order to respond. So as I was saying, if we perceive it as something I couldn't digest, it'll be somewhere in our digestive system. Our digestive system, maybe our stomach, maybe our gut, our intestines, will be trying to support us by trying to help us to digest whatever that thing is. And it may be a literal thing. It may be something you've eaten that you're struggling to digest. I gave an example previously in a previous session about wild animals. So perhaps a lion or a big cat who swallows a lump of bone that is too big to pass through the stomach. So the stomach will secrete extra acid and it'll be producing extra cells in order to secrete that extra acid. And that's the sort of thing that our body does in the stress phase. But as metaphorical beings, we may be doing that same response for information because we're seeing information metaphorically in the same ways we do food. Or if it's a musculoskeletal thing, if we're feeling burdened, if we're feeling I couldn't stand up straight, or I had no backbone in that situation, I couldn't stand up for myself, then it'll be impacting on the specific bones, muscles in that area. So whether it's our shoulder or our spine or whatever that might be, legs, if we felt we couldn't run away. And skin too. So skin will respond if there's something that a touch maybe that we want but aren't currently experiencing, or don't want but it is there and we can't seem to get rid of it. Because skin is about touch, about separation, whether we're missing somebody, we're finding that separation painful, or we want to separate ourselves from something that's in our environment that we don't want. But in that phase, these changes are taking place as our body seeks to support us in however it feels is best given that particular Yudin. Then something happens at 4 and we experience a shift. And that takes us out of fight or flight and into rest and repair. And as the name suggests, in this phase, our body is seeking to repair itself. It's trying to undo the changes that it went through in the stress phase in order to get back to balance. So you can see how in 3, it goes above the line and it's red. And that depth, that intensity is reflected in the green of the regeneration, the rest and repair phase. In the stress phase, we don't tend to feel sick because if we felt sick, if we felt pain, we wouldn't be able to do that fight or flight. If we were fighting somebody and they punched us and we dropped down in pain, we wouldn't be fighting for our survival anymore. If we were running away, stubbed our toe, twisted our ankle, and weren't able to run anymore, again, we might not survive. So in that phase, we often experience numbness, or we can experience extra energy as the body is seeking to respond to the energy of that Yudin. But the body wants to be back to its blueprint, its inner blueprint. Every single cell in our body has its optimum way of functioning. And once the stress has shifted, if we're able to shift that completely, our body will seek to get back to full well-being. If we've been able to shift part of it, the body will seek to rebalance that part until it has hopefully eventually got to shifting all of it. And as it said in that law right at the very beginning of the session, go through the fullness of those 2 phases and come back out at 8 in well-being. In 5 and 7, the rest and repair or regeneration phase, as it's undoing the changes it made in 3, in the stress phase, we can start to feel quite unwell because our body is detoxing from those changes. It's putting itself back to its optimum, to its baseline, to its norm, its blueprint. So we're trying to get rid of any extra that we had, like with the extra cells for the lion in its stomach to digest that bit of bone that was too big to go through its digestive system, or to repair our muscles and our bones. And if you think of somebody who goes to the gym, they're lifting weights above what's comfortable in order to stretch those muscles. And in doing that, the muscle fibers actually tear. And that's obviously it's challenging, and you get the lactic acid buildup, and that's painful. But what's actually the ache comes afterwards as the muscle is repairing. So for me, it's often on the second day. If I exercise, the next day is not too bad. I feel okay. But the day after that, it's almost like you're coming down with flu or something. You get those aches and those pains as the muscle fibers are repairing and healing and getting back to normal, actually coming back stronger, because that's why we lift weights, to build muscle. But that's actually what's also going on when you have that day of flu, colds and flus, and you get those aches and pains. It's where the muscles were struggling with something before, during the stress phase, and then when we go into rest and repair, they're seeking to heal, and that's when it gets painful. That's when we're able to feel pain as well, because in the stress phase, we are numbed to that pain in order to be able to survive. But it does mean that rest and repair can be quite uncomfortable. We maybe get stomach upset, we maybe get aches and pains in bones and muscles, and we can have things with our skin like eczema. They're in that rest and repair phase. So when we experience those symptoms, it's actually the body seeking to heal. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but there are things that we can do things that we can put in place to support ourselves to work through that, which is why it's so important that we give ourselves space and time. So whether that's time off work, resting, feeding ourselves, nourishing ourselves. You can see that the regeneration phase is divided into 2 here. In 5, you might not be very hungry. You might be feeling quite queasy. But when we get into 7, I like to think of that as convalescence. So that's when we start to feel like, I want to eat rich food, not rich foods maybe, but nutritious foods. That's the word I was looking for. We want those stews and soups. We want the colors of the rainbow to give us all the nutrients, because in that part of this diagram, our body is seeking to rebuild. So it's wanting all those healthy, nutritious foods. In the stress phase, we might be looking for sugar and caffeine because we're looking for fast energy to fuel that fight or flight. 6 in the diagram is healing peaks. I'll be talking a little bit about those later, but if you want to know more on healing peaks, I advise you to, again, go to my YouTube channel, because I did one of these Let's Talk Wellbeing sessions looking specifically at healing peaks, so I go into them in much more detail there. So just as a summary, in the stress phase, what we might feel in our body, rather than ache or pain, what we might feel is stress. Kind of goes with what it says on the tin, that we might feel tension in our muscles, maybe in the neck, maybe get those stress headaches a little bit. And we might find ourselves video looping, so obsessive thinking. But as I said, everything the body does, it does with a purpose. The video looping and obsessive thinking is, in effect, our brains trying to explore the Yudin, whatever the situation was that left us feeling threatened, left us feeling traumatized. What happened? How can I analyze that? How can I find a solution to that? I'm going to replay it and replay it and replay it. I'm going to think about it obsessively. It's our body doing what it's designed to do with the aim of helping us. But when we understand that, we can work with it rather than feel at the mercy of it. Sleeplessness can come from that overthinking. And also from the fact that we may be feeling a bit restless, we may be feeling anxious, because our body will be flooded with those stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, which are designed for fight or flight. And so we may feel like we need to take action. And sometimes, particularly in our world, in the way that we live now in urban societies, we don't generally have saber-toothed tigers and other predators jumping out at us. So that fight or flight might not be as helpful a response as it would have been back in the days when we were hunter-gatherers, where we needed to take physical action. It might be if you're being chased or a mugger jumps out at you, great, then your body is doing something that will help you in that situation, taking action. But a lot of our current urban life stresses are having to give a presentation in front of a group, or working with tech, computers that maybe let us down, or the Wi-Fi goes off, or the laptop dies, the battery dies. In those cases, fear for your job, wondering if you're going to get a promotion, thinking about the economic challenges that many of us are experiencing right now, going into fight or flight, being flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, is not necessarily going to help us in those situations. It can stop us thinking clearly, which is what we want in those situations, because it makes us very focused, very foveal thinking. So the fovea being the spot at the back of your eyes where it's just very focused viewing as opposed to the more peripheral view. And we just get literally blinded by panic, and we just want to get out of Dodge, but we're not able to see the opportunities maybe that are coming from more lateral thinking or more problem-solving brain. When we're in chronic stress as well, we can start working more from the left side of our brain, which is more analytical and structured and rule-based, versus the right-hand creative problem-solving side of our brain. So although the body is doing its best from its programming, it's still functioning on that hunter-gatherer setup, rather than having got the memo that we're in the 21st century now, and our challenges are not ones that are maybe best addressed by fight or flight. So when we can understand what our body's doing, understand that feeling of anxiousness that is actually coming from those hormones, and maybe from some reactivation of previous Yudins that still are held in our body, that still bring up those fearful thoughts and feelings, then we can start to look for, explore ways we can support ourselves in order to reground, recenter, bring back some clarity in our thinking rather than the video looping. In this stress phase, we may also experience a lack of appetite. The blood in our bodies, in our circulation, is being redirected to the vital organs, the lungs, the heart, to our muscles, all of those parts of our body that support fight or flight. So the big muscles in your legs, or as I said, the lungs and the heart, to get that circulation, get the oxygen, the nutrients pumping around your body to fuel that action. But it's then coming away from the stomach, away from the digestion, which can leave you feeling maybe a little bit nauseous, butterflies in the stomach, that excited kind of stomach where I don't think I can eat right now. But again, it's just because the body is doing what it's designed to do, to send the blood to the parts where it's needed most for the survival, fight or flight. But if this is a chronic situation and we're not eating for a long period of time, we're not able to eat as much, or when we do eat, our digestion isn't working as effectively, it can result in a loss of weight. We may also, because of the redirection of our circulation, experience cold extremities, cold hands and feet, fingers and toes. Our blood pressure will go up, again supporting that pumping and circulation of our blood. And our blood vessels are contracting to support all of that as well. And we may sweat, but in this phase, it's cold, clammy sweat. That's the stress sweat. So those cold, clammy hands you get when you're about to do something that makes you nervous. Moving into the rest and repair phase, here what we experience is things like fatigue, real deep fatigue. Again, everything has a purpose. Your body is asking you to rest. It's saying it needs you to stop, to be calm and still while it does its repair work. It needs that space and time to do that repair. We may have a good appetite, as I was saying, in the latter phase, in the convalescent part, number 7 in the earlier diagram. Our body is looking for the things, the nutrients that help it build, rebuild. So foods of different colors, because each color brings different nutrients, nutrient-rich foods. So if you're a meat eater, maybe things like chicken broth, bone broth. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, things like vegetable stews, those beans and pulses that bring those proteins and vitamins and minerals into your body. Can mean that you put on a little bit of weight, but it'll all balance out, so it's fine. Your extremities will be warm again as the circulation goes back to that more restful, peaceful circulation where it's not having to redirect the blood away from the extremities or away from your digestion, which means that your digestion is working more effectively again. Your blood pressure will come back down. Your heart rate will slow. The blood vessels will open back up. Again, everything is just returning to normal. But you may also experience extra temperature in your body. Your temperature may rise. So you may have a fever. And if you sweat in this phase, it's the warm, sticky sweat rather than the cold and clammy that was present in the stress phase. So that's just a summary of the differences that you can experience and the symptoms that you maybe will recognize and know, oh, I'm in stress phase because my hands and feet are cold and I'm feeling anxious, I'm video looping and I'm not sleeping very well. Or, gosh, I must be in rest and repair because I'm so tired and my bones feel weary and achy, and I'm actually really craving those nutritious foods. So just have a look through those lists and maybe come back to this video afterwards and have a think of either what you're experiencing now or, oh, I remember when I was in stress because I had that thing coming up and I actually experienced many of those. Or I remember when a stressful period of time had passed. Maybe quite often we think of colds and flu as being winter-related bugs, but are they? Or are they perhaps also, or in part at least, due to the fact that we work really hard up to Christmas and New Year, the festive season, between trying to tie up all the loose ends at work before everything closes down for 2 weeks, and maybe we've got family coming over at Christmas and we want to have Christmas perfect. We've got all the shopping to do, and the to-do list just gets longer and longer. All of that stress, all of that striving, all of that pushing, needing to get things done, putting pressure on ourselves, that maybe then stops when we stop for the holidays. And that's quite often when we get sick. So whether you get sick when you go away in the summer, or like me, when I was a child, I had chickenpox in the summer holidays, I had German measles in the Easter holidays. We can find that we get sick when we go on holiday, when we take a break. Perhaps this is at least part of the reason why. So good to just bear that in mind and see how this might fit into your experience. I said the first diagram I showed was a very simplified version of the dis-ease process. It can look different for different people in different situations. And this is another couple of examples. So in the top diagram there, I mentioned at the beginning that you can see the depth of the red, or the height of the red is reflected by the depth of the green in the first one, orange and purple here. And that reflects the intensity. But also you can see 2 to 4, and then 4 going to the end of the purpley bit there, which would have been 7 in the previous diagram. It doesn't really have a number here. The bit that's just next, it's between 5 and 7 here, or sorry, between 4 and 7 in this top diagram. So the length of the stress phase and the length of the regeneration phase are often, for simple conditions, the same length. And it's something that we can actually use in the meta-consciousness analysis to work out where you are and maybe how much longer the regeneration phase might go if it flows smoothly and you have no reactivation of that UDIN. In the second diagram, the lower one here, you can see that the stress phase was much more intense. The height of the orange section is much bigger, and that is reflected in the depth of the purple section. So however intense the stress phase is, that's going to be reflected in the intensity of the regeneration phase. If the intensity was low, the intensity of the regeneration will be low. If the intensity is high, the regeneration can be more intense, but again, when you understand what's happening, there are things you can put in place to bring that intensity down. Because for some symptoms particularly, you don't want them to be too intense, but equally, when they get very intense, they may go above the survival threshold. So obviously we want to support ourselves, we want to support our survival, we don't want to push our body that far, that fast. So we may look to reduce the intensity, which might mean that that stretches that time scale out longer, but we're doing it for survival, for safety, for self-care reasons. And this is another example which reflects what happens when the UDIN is reactivated, as it said on that statement right on the first slide. If the energy of the UDIN hasn't been fully processed and released, if some of it is still in our body, as Bessel van der Kolk said, if our body is still keeping that score, then it can be reactivated. It'll be reactivated by something that reminds us of that first UDIN. So it says here in this diagram, a trigger, and it labels them 2 in each instance because it is a reflection of that first UDIN, as it was in the first diagram labeled number 2. Unfortunately, as you can also see here, the intensity for each instance can sometimes build because our thresholds are increasing and our stress levels may be therefore increasing. And I'm currently listening to Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And in that book, he talks about how our thought processes are reflected in our bodies. And then that is reflected in our thought processes. So how we think determines how we feel, and how we feel determines why we think. And unless we break that cycle, it'll just keep going. And if our thoughts actually can themselves be something that re-triggers us, particularly if we have a chronic condition that's been going for some time. I mentioned the example of a bad back. If you have a back that gives you twinges now and again, you might, as soon as you get a twinge, think, oh no, my back's gone again. Or, oh, this is such a bad time for me to have this right now when I needed to be able to do something. What is it about bad backs? They always happen just when you need to be fit and you need to be able to lift boxes or whatever it is. It just seems that these kind of things, the sod's law. But when we think those thoughts, it impacts on our sense of strength and ability and capacity, which, as I said, is the kind of thing that impacts on our musculoskeletal system. So it can become a perpetuating cycle, like in this diagram, and it becomes a chronic condition. But also in Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, he's saying that the more we think those thoughts and program our body with those thoughts, the more the threshold will increase. And our body actually, we need as human beings to be confirmed in our beliefs. So we will look for evidence. It's like the anxious person who needs to be anxious. And if things kind of get sorted in their life, they're kind of like, what's going to happen next? They're still anticipating. And in a sense, it becomes like an adrenaline junkie. You need that fix. You're looking for something that's going to leave you feeling satisfied for that need, even if it's not something that you know is going to support you, because your cells have been altered. Our inner biology and inner chemistry and our thought processes actually determine the receptors on our cells, how our genes switch on and off, how they're activated. And if we've got receptors on our cells that are saying, I need adrenaline, then they'll be looking for that adrenaline. And the more they get, the more they need, because the more the threshold goes up. And this is all part of that cycle until we stop and we do, we notice that this is what's happening. We take stock and we think, this isn't serving me. I want to make a change. I want to interrupt this cycle and interrupt this pattern and create something new for myself. And when we take that action, there's a lot that we can do, and it only needs to be small steps. Keeping it simple, doing small things, seems too simple, but that's actually the way to make huge leaps and huge changes. And it doesn't take that much to make those little shifts, and they're cumulative over time, just as the downward spiral is cumulative, so is the upward spiral. And if we take little steps and see positive impacts from those, we want more. It builds a momentum and it becomes exponential. So no matter where you are in your own journey of healing or dis-ease, there are still things that you can do to support yourself to feel better. And we don't necessarily start it for that reason, expecting to get to full fitness again. But as we start to make little changes and we start to think differently, then we're setting ourselves up with different receptors, and then we're looking for confirmation of that. So if I start to think, I'm healing, my body is healing, I'm so grateful to my body, realizing that it's doing these things for me, and I'm starting to work with it, I'm starting to listen to it, and I'm starting to respond to what it's asking for. I take rest breaks when it says that it needs them. I fill it with the fuel that it needs, the nutrition and the nutrients that it needs, that I'm listening to what it's asking for today, and I give it that. Then that starts to change how I feel, and that starts to change my thinking, and that starts to reprogram my cells, and that changes how I feel, which changes how I think, and it starts to build from there. Just going back again to look at the symptoms we might experience in stress and why. We might be sleepless. Because we've got all of this restless energy, our body wants also to have more waking hours in which to resolve the issue, in which to address the issue, and to, as we now know, we can unpack our symptoms. We have more wakeful hours in which we can do that exploration, but we can choose how to use that once we're aware of what's going on, rather than worrying about why can't I sleep. We might choose to use that time very effectively and purposefully. So maybe journaling, getting things out and putting them down on paper, or using it for guided meditations, or for breathing exercises to help us calm, reground, recenter, get back some clarity, break that pattern of video looping. We might be reaching for chocolate and caffeine to fuel the fight or flight. But when we know that's what's going on, and we can work with our body to come out of those anxious feelings and to support ourselves, maybe we would make other choices of foods that we know maybe are calming foods that will help our body to resettle. It'll give us some fuel, like perhaps a banana, that gives us some fuel, but also helps to give us other nutrients that can support our well-being. We might feel nervous and anxious. The bottom left image is meant to represent that. And again, using things like breathing exercises, we can support ourselves when we feel that way. There are exercises that I share on my on my YouTube channel. Self-care exercises playlist has lots in there, breathing exercises, tapping, other things that you can do when you want to give yourself that little bit of an extra, as we say in Wales, cwtch, feeling safe, feeling warm, feeling cared for, a little bit of self-love to support our healing. The next image just above that then is the cold hands and feet. And if you're feeling that way, it's a sign perhaps that you're holding some stress in your body. So cuddle up warm and look at ways to support your body to come back down into rest and repair. And if you're wanting constructive ways to understand your symptoms, to know what your body is telling you in order to know best how to respond, again, I highly recommend a meta-consciousness analysis if you really want to dig down to that root cause and to help you put together a map for yourself, a path, a set of steps that will help you in your situation to work through that healing in the best, most measured way for you. You don't want to rush it too fast in some situations, particularly. In others, if it's not too intense, just do it as feels right for you. But in some situations, it's about knowing how to do that at an appropriate pace. Some of the symptoms, if you're experiencing any of these, they are signs of healing. So top right, if we start there, swelling and inflammation. Those are signs of the body seeking to heal. And it's about listening to that message from our body and going with that, providing it what it needs. Again, if you want to know that specifically for your situation, it's best to have an analysis with a meta-consciousness practitioner, because we are so subjective in how we perceive things that happen to us, what's going on in our body, and to be able to really understand your unique individual situation, then getting an analysis or at least talking with a coach to help you get some understanding of why that symptom, why now, why that part of your body, then that can really help. The next one down, I've spoken already about having problems with musculoskeletal tissues. So maybe the bad back, pain in your shoulder, dodgy knee, the ankle, whatever it might be. Those pains and aches are actually the body trying to get back to balance. If it's chronic, it means that the original reason why your body responded in that way is still active. The body is still carrying that, keeping the score, So if you want to get to the bottom of what's still being held in your body, that's still asking for your attention to be addressed, a meta-consciousness analysis can really help with that. Stomach issues, again, I said anything digestion can be related to information because we're very metaphorical beings. So also listen to your language, paying attention to how we talk to ourselves that might be re-triggering UDINs that our body may already be carrying, or might be leaving us vulnerable to those sorts of perceptions, that we might perceive something as a UDIN because that's how our brain has been looking at the world. The next one up, being hot with the fan, that's just a reminder that we can experience those increases in temperature like you would get in a flu. So higher temperature, maybe even a fever, that is also a sign that your body is seeking to heal and to rest and repair. The top one there is just feeling really those flu-y symptoms, the fatigue, the aches, where you're just exhausted and all you want to do is go back to bed and crawl under the duvet. All of these are signs of the body seeking to heal, just asking for rest, for time, for permission to listen to what it's saying to you and doing your best to respond to that rather than fighting against it. Yes, at times we may need to take medication. We may need to support those symptoms not to be too intense. But as this second law says, the body just wants to go through the whole of that rest and repair to undo all of the changes that it went through in stress phase in order to get back to its original blueprint, its baseline, its norm, where it functions at its optimum. So the more we can allow it to do that, giving ourselves the time, being gentle with ourselves, really listening and responding to what the body's asking for, the better. I mentioned that the healing peak happens in the rest and repair stage. You may have noticed that it goes back up above the line and it's the same color as the stress phase, because basically it's a mirror of that energy. But what you can experience will depend on which part of the body, which tissue, and which part of the brain that relates to. So again, I highly recommend that you watch the video about that specifically, the one on healing peaks, if you want to know more about that. But these are the sorts of things that you might experience. So if you are having any of these, remember that they are part of the healing. If you've been having those regeneration phase symptoms and then you get a day or a short period of time with these symptoms, it's your body again trying to heal. So you might get, for digestion things, intestinal cramps, diarrhea, vomiting, liver cramps, liver comes under digestion, excessive urination. In the cerebellum, that's the part that is to do with things like the pleura around the lungs, the sac around the lungs, the sac around your digestive organs. All of those kind of protective membranes come under this part of the brain. And here you'll get things like pus and a squeezing feeling. There's often a squeezing feeling with a healing peak because it's trying to get rid of those things that it had built up during the stress phase and it now wants to release. In the next one there, you might have some changes in heart rhythm for the midbrain, because the midbrain is to do with our heart rhythm. In the musculoskeletal areas, you might get aches, cramps, spasms, and twitches. And again, the continuous moving or shaking is just extended spasms and twitching. And you can get heart arrhythmia here in terms of the muscle. And then in the last relay, you can get things like migraines, intense itching, which can come with things like eczema. You might get a coughing fit or an asthma attack, heartburn, panic attacks. They often come with those sort of sensory things, because this part of our brain is all about how we take in information from the world around us. Sense of touch, sight, smell, hearing, taste. They come in this group. And like I said, with getting the flu, here what we might experience is that little bit where we feel better for a day. The muscle pain's gone away, the headache's gone away, we feel better, feel more energy. But when we get to work, that energy just goes through the floor, and we wish we could go back home, but maybe it's just not possible once we're in work. So we push ourselves on through, which is why I think that convalescent phase is so important. Really giving ourselves the time to recover fully, not pushing ourselves before we're ready. And fainting can sometimes happen in healing peaks as well. If any of this has kind of piqued your interest, or you're thinking, gosh, yes, I have that symptom chronically, or I've had it in the past and I wanted to know more about it, then I highly encourage you to look into my 3-day workshop. The next one's coming up in October, from Friday the 11th to Sunday the 13th, 10 o'clock till 1400, 4 o'clock in the afternoon each day. And it's going to be here in this cabin at Wild Wellbeing. And it is, as it says there, looking at our body's language. The only language it has to speak to us is physical symptoms and how we feel emotionally as well, those emotional and physical sensations. How then do we interpret those? How do we unpack them and unpick them and decode them and know what our body's actually asking for? Sometimes I think we have a general sense, but in a lot of the things I hear from people, it's not in line with what I have learned through metaconsciousness. It's kind of there, but it's slightly off. And it's that kind of misinformation that can lead us down rabbit holes and make us think we've got an answer, which is actually taking us slightly away from what our body is really asking for. So if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to really get a handle on what your body's saying, how to interpret your symptoms, and then how to support your body to get it back to its blueprint, back to healing and wholeness, I highly recommend this workshop. This one coming up in October is the last one for 2024. I will be running more in 2025, but the price will be going up. So it's currently $299. If you'd like to have it at that price, come along in October. But if perhaps you're not in my local area or the October dates don't suit, then I also run this as an online self-learning course, which is a set of modules for you to work through, but also Zoom calls to connect in and just check in on your learning and see how you're doing, making sure that it's all making sense to you, you don't have any questions, or to answer any questions you do have. So either option is available. Just get in touch with me and I'm very happy to tell you more. And if you'd like to just go straight ahead, if you think, yes, this is for me, you want to book a ticket, this link and or QR code will take you to my events page on my website, and you can see the Unlocking Healing Wisdom workshop there and just follow through the clicks to book a place on that if you're interested. And also then to say that, of course, I have my book. I mentioned metaconsciousness in there. And I talk a lot about my own personal experience of this journey and how learning metaconsciousness really made sense of it all for me, brought it all together, all of the different things that I'd been through, the things that I'd learnt. Metaconsciousness just opened my eyes and as I say, made sense of it all. But if you want to know more about that, if you'd like to just have a conversation before you decide whether or not you want to do the course, then by all means, just get in touch. That's the link for my book. If you'd like to take a look, have a copy, or get in touch with me, then this is the link. Sorry, that was my husband just popping his head around the door. This is the link to go to my calendar where you can book in for a Zoom call. And we can then have a chat. If you've got any questions, I'm very happy to answer those for you. And that's the last slide for today. So thank you so much if you've stuck with me to the end. As I say, please do get in touch if you've got any questions or any comments, any things that you'd like me to explore in these sessions. There are 5 biological laws, so I'm going to be going through that series. But after that, if there's anything else that you'd like me particularly to focus on, then I'm very happy to do a live about particular topics, or feel free just to get in touch if you'd rather just chat with me one-to-one about any concern, any health questions, queries that you have. So as I say, thank you very much. This being Friday, if you're watching today, I wish you a wonderful weekend, but I wish you a wonderful rest of your day whenever you are watching this. And I'll see you again next month. Bye for now.